All right, so 2050, picture this. What's powering your morning coffee? What's making those factories hum in the distance? What's keeping the lights on in our cities? Is it all going to be, sunshine and wind? Or are we going to see something, I don't know, a bit more of a mix when it comes to our energy?
Yeah, I think it's a question a lot of people are trying to figure out.
Totally. And that's what makes our deep dive today so interesting. You sent over this report, the Global Gas Outlook 2050 from the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. And wow, it's dense. It's packed with all these predictions about everything, how much energy we're going to need, where it's going to come from, even how economies might shift. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, no, it's a really comprehensive piece of work.
Oh, yeah.
It goes into lots of different sectors and regions.
Right.
And they've really got a lot of data to back up their forecasts.
For sure. And I'll be honest, sometimes going through this much info, it feels like running a marathon. So think of this as like the express lane to understanding that long-term energy picture, with a real focus on natural gas. We're pulling out the main points, the stuff that makes you think, interesting.
Yeah. And just to give some context, the report comes from the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, or GECF.
Right.
And they're all about advocating for natural gas on the global stage.
Totally. And they're not a small group either.
No.
You've got members like Algeria, Bolivia, Egypt, Equatorial Guinea, Iran, Libya, Nigeria. Gosh, the list goes on. Qatar, Russia, Trinidad and Tobago, the UAE, Venezuela. And then you've got observer countries like Angola, Azerbaijan, Iraq, Malaysia, Mauritania, Mozambique, Peru, even Senegal.
Yep.
So, it's a report that definitely has a perspective on where natural gas is headed.
Definitely.
Okay, so our mission today, I think it's to really grasp how this report sees natural gas fitting into the global energy puzzle all the way out to 2050. We'll be exploring how things like global economic growth, population changes, all that tech advancement, even climate policies, how all that plays into it. Hopefully we'll uncover some surprises and some must-know info along the way, things that leave you feeling like you really get it without having to read through hundreds of pages yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's kick things off with the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
What are some of the major global shifts this outlook anticipates by the middle of the century?
Well, what's pretty amazing is the scale of the change they're projecting.
Okay.
They expect the world's economy to basically double in size by 2050.
Wow. Double.
Yeah. But even more interesting, I think, is where they see that economic activity happening. The Asia-Pacific region, they're projecting it to become the dominant economic force, accounting for a whopping 42% of global GDP.
42%. Wow. Okay. So that's a massive shift in the balance of power, right?
Yeah.
What does that mean for the other major players,
Yeah.
the ones we're used to thinking about?
Yeah, well, in comparison, they suggest that both Europe and North America, their share of the global economic pie is actually going to shrink.
Okay.
Europe down to around 17%, and North America, roughly 25%. It's a real signal, I think, of the increasing economic weight of that Asia-Pacific region.
For sure.
So when you think about global markets, innovation, that's really the region to watch.
Okay, it's not just about the money, though, right? We've got to factor in how many people will be on this planet, where they're going to be living.
Oh, for sure.
What does the report say about that?
Well, global population, that's projected to hit about 9.8 billion by 2050. In Africa, that's where they see the biggest population growth happening. Interestingly, while Asia-Pacific will still be the most populous region overall, their rate of population increase, it's actually expected to slow down quite a bit compared to what we've seen in recent decades. And globally, the report highlights this continuing trend of declining fertility rates.
Okay, so a more crowded planet, but with people spread out differently than today? What other major societal shifts are they pointing to that we should have on our radar?
Well, urbanization, that's a big one.
Right.
We're going to see a huge increase in the number of households globally.
Aye.
They're projecting a jump of about 35%, which is actually faster than the overall population growth. For you, that means more demand for energy in residential areas,
Right.
more homes needing power, heating, cooling, all of that.
Yeah, more urban centers, more concentrated energy needs. It makes total sense.
That's sure.
Now, the report also dives into technology, particularly AI, artificial intelligence. What kind of reshaping do they foresee happening because of AI.
Yeah, well, they see technological advancements, especially AI, as being really, really transformative.
Hmm.
They expect AI to significantly boost productivity across a wide range of industries.
Okay.
Manufacturing, healthcare, agriculture, and importantly for us, energy. Think of AI optimizing energy grids, making resource extraction more efficient, even helping us develop new energy technologies faster.
Okay, so that's where it gets really fascinating, right? It's like these tech shifts could have ripple effects across all these other areas we've been talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
What about the overall, geopolitical landscape? Are they anticipating any major power shifts there?
Yeah, the report highlights the increasing importance of what they call South-South cooperation,
Okay.
which is basically cooperation between developing countries. Groups like BRICS, for example, they're mentioned as potentially forging stronger economic ties between these nations. And then there's a discussion around possible changes in the global financial system, maybe with the rise of new payment systems that could challenge the traditional order.
Wow. Okay. So a world with a totally different economic map, big population changes, super fast tech advancements, and maybe even a shift in global power dynamics. I mean, that's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Let's focus in now on what all this means for, the big topic here, energy demand. What are the main projections for how much energy we'll need and where it's going to come from?
Okay, so overall, they project global energy demand to increase by 18% by 2050.
All right, so we're going to need more energy overall. Makes sense.
But here's the thing. The mix of energy sources we use to meet that demand, that's expected to change dramatically. Renewables, like solar and wind, they're highlighted as the fastest growing energy sources.
Right.
They're projecting a jump from just 3% of the total mix in 2023 to a whopping 17% by 2050.
Okay, so a pretty significant shift towards renewables.
For sure.
But what about natural gas? Where does that fit in with all this talk about cleaner energy?
Well, despite the growth of renewables, they expect natural gas to remain a really important part of the mix,
Okay.
holding around a 24% share in 2050.
Wow, still a big player.
Yeah, and they emphasize its role in providing flexibility to the system, particularly in balancing out the intermittent nature of renewables like solar and wind. Basically, it's like a reliable backup. When the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, natural gas can step in to keep the lights on.
Right. Like a supporting role, but a crucial one.
Exactly.
Now we hear so much about the world becoming more and more electrified.
Yeah.
What does the report say about that?
They're projecting electricity's share of final energy consumption to rise quite a lot, from 21% in 2023 to 30% by 2050.
Okay.
And here's an interesting point. They think natural gas-fired generation will actually supply about 12% of that new electricity demand. We'll see.
Oh, wow. So even with renewables growing so fast, natural gas will still be a big part of keeping things running.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Are there any other energy sources they expect to see big growth in?
Hydrogen, that's one to watch.
Okay.
Demand for hydrogen is projected to increase really rapidly, with green hydrogen, which is produced from renewable electricity, and blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas, but with carbon capture, they're leading the way.
Got it.
They also project a decline in coal's share of the energy mix, which aligns with, a lot of those global climate goals. And oil, they still expect it to be a major source, holding around 26% of the mix in 2050.
Okay, so even with the push for renewables, it sounds like fossil fuels are still going to be around for a while.
It seems that way.
What about the different parts of the economy?
Yeah.
Like how will industry and services, how are their energy needs expected to change?
Well, they expect the service sector to contribute more and more to the global economy, while the industrial sector share, that might decrease a bit.
Okay.
And that shift will, of course, affect how much energy those sectors use.
All right, so with that big picture in mind, let's get more specific. Where do they see the biggest growth in demand for natural gas happening, like regionally?
Asia Pacific, that's where they see the most growth in overall energy demand, and that includes natural gas specifically.
Okay.
They point to China and India in particular as driving a lot of that increase.
So what's behind this big jump in gas demand in China and India?
A few things, actually. In China, government policies are encouraging the use of natural gas as a cleaner alternative to coal.
Makes sense.
Partly because they're really focused on improving air quality in their cities. Plus, they've got strong industrial growth, which also needs energy.
Right.
In India, it's similar. Concerns about air quality and growing industry are factors, but they're also seeing more and more use of compressed natural gas, CNG, and liquefied natural gas, LNG, for transportation, especially trucks. Basically, what we're seeing is how urbanization and industrialization are influencing their energy choices.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, besides Asia-Pacific, any other regions where we should expect a notable jump in natural gas demand?
Africa, they're projecting significant growth there.
Got it.
And Latin America, too, especially in the power generation sector. But they point out a challenge for Latin America. They have limited pipeline connections between countries.
Okay.
So they might end up relying more on imports of liquefied natural gas, LNG. Countries like Brazil and Argentina, they're specifically mentioned for their initiatives to increase natural gas use.
Okay, what about the more developed markets like Europe and North America? What's the outlook for natural gas demand there?
Well, in Europe, they expect some growth in the short term. But over the long term, they project a decline as the region focuses on its climate goals and invests more in renewables. North America's gas demand, that's projected to grow at a slower pace compared to other regions.
All right, so we've talked about Europe and North America.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Middle East? I mean, they sit on massive natural gas reserves.
Right. Well, interestingly, the Middle East itself is actually projected to see a big jump in natural gas demand.
Really?
Yeah. They highlight Iran as a key driver there, with growth expected in their domestic sector, power generation, and industry, partly because of their low fuel prices.
Okay, so we've got a clearer picture of where the demand's headed.
Yeah.
Now, the big question is, where's all this natural gas going to come from to meet this growing demand? What's the outlook for global production?
Well, to keep up with that demand, they're projecting global natural gas production to increase by about 30% by 2050.
Wow, 30%.
But where that extra production comes from, that's expected to change.
Okay, so which regions are going to be the hotspots for natural gas production in the coming decades?
Africa, they project the fastest growth there, specifically mentioning countries like Nigeria, Mozambique, Mauritania, and Senegal. They've got big reserves, and there are a lot of projects in development.
Yeah.
The Middle East, they'll also see growth, building on their already substantial production.
Makes sense. What about some of the other major gas-producing regions?
Well, Eurasia's share of global production is projected to increase, mostly driven by developments in Russia and Azerbaijan, particularly the Shah Deniz field.
Okay.
Romania is also mentioned as having potential with their Neptune Deep project in the Black Sea.
Got it.
Interestingly, North America's unconventional production, from fracking, that's expected to peak and then gradually decline over the long term. And overall, they see GECF member countries playing a bigger role in global production.
Well, that makes sense considering who put out the report.
Right.
Okay, so we've got gas being produced in different parts of the world, demand concentrated in others.
Right.
The trade of natural gas becomes super important then.
Absolutely.
What does this outlook suggest about the future of LNG and pipeline gas trade?
Well, they're projecting big growth in global LNG trade.
Okay.
Asia-Pacific will be the main importer, driven by China, South Asia, and Southeast Asia. In fact, China could become the world's top LNG importer.
Wow, okay. And who are the major players expected to be supplying all this LNG?
North America, they're on track to become the biggest LNG exporter globally. They mention things like changes in regulations, like lifting the ban on exports from the U.S. as factors driving that growth.
Got it.
Eurasia's LNG exports are also expected to increase significantly, maybe even quadrupling by mid-century.
Oh, wow.
And Africa is also set to become a bigger LNG exporter, with projects in countries like Algeria, Nigeria, Mozambique, the Republic of Congo, Senegal, and Mauritania all contributing to that growth.
Okay, so lots of LNG on the move. What about Europe? Considering the recent shifts in their gas supply, what's the outlook for their LNG imports?
Well, they expect Europe to rely more on LNG in the short term while they diversify their gas supply. But over the long term, they project a decline in those LNG imports, matching the decrease in their overall gas demand. And they specifically mention Germany's strategy with those floating storage and regasification units, the FSRUs, to quickly boost their LNG import capacity.
Okay, so a short-term solution while they work on the long-term strategy.
Yeah, it seems that way.
What about traditional pipeline gas trade? Will that still be a big deal?
Yeah, for sure. They highlight Eurasia's increasing pipeline exports, especially towards Asia, and they mention the potential for more pipeline infrastructure within Africa, connecting different countries on the continent.
Okay, so pipelines aren't going away just yet. Makes sense. Now, getting all this gas produced and shipped around the world, that's going to take massive investment.
Absolutely.
What does the report say about the financial side of things and the role of technology in all of this?
Well, they emphasize the need for major upstream investment globally just to keep up with the projected demand.
Okay.
North America and Asia Pacific, they're expected to need the most investment in exploration and production. And there's a concern about the increasing reliance on higher cost gas resources, which obviously means more investment needed overall.
Okay, so that increase in production costs, that could eventually trickle down to consumers and businesses, right?
Yeah.
What about investments in pipelines, LNG terminals, all that infrastructure?
Well, they raise a concern about potential underinvestment in midstream projects like pipelines and storage, especially after 2030.
Okay.
And that could create bottlenecks and even impact the reliability of gas supply.
Right.
On the LNG side, they expect big investments in both liquefaction facilities, which turn the gas into liquid for shipping, and regasification terminals, which turn it back into gas at the destination.
Got it.
They specifically mention Europe rapidly increasing their regasification capacity as an example of that trend.
Okay, so lots of investment needed across the board. What role does technology play in all of this?
Well, they talk about AI and other technology as being used to optimize upstream operations, making things like exploration, drilling, and production more efficient and potentially cheaper. But they also point out the challenges of adopting these technologies, like the upfront costs and the need for expertise. And they mention specific investment plans in countries like Indonesia and Malaysia to upgrade and expand their gas infrastructure.
Okay, so a mix of opportunity and challenges there.
Yeah.
Now, we can't talk about energy today without talking about sustainability and the environment.
Absolutely.
How does this report address natural gas's role in a world that's trying to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, they emphasize that natural gas has a lower carbon intensity compared to coal and oil.
What?
And they see that as a key reason why demand for it will stay strong, especially in developing economies that need to balance their energy needs with their environmental goals. They also highlight its potential in sectors that are hard to electrify, like heavy industry and long-haul transportation.
Okay.
And it's important for producing blue hydrogen, which can be a big part of a lower carbon energy system if it's paired with carbon capture and storage.
But there's also the issue of methane emissions from gas production and transportation. How do they address that?
Yeah, no, they acknowledge that's important. They mention regulations in places like the EU and the US aimed at reducing methane leaks from gas infrastructure.
Okay.
But they also mention that these regulations in the US could change. They also discuss carbon pricing mechanisms like the EU emissions trading system and how that impacts the energy transition. Basically, the EU ETS puts a price on carbon dioxide emissions, which makes lower carbon fuels like natural gas more appealing compared to things like coal.
Right.
And they project the price of carbon permits under that system to keep going up.
Okay, interesting. The report also talks about the outcomes of those big climate conferences, COP28 and COP29.
Yeah.
What are the key takeaways from those events that relate to this outlook for natural gas?
They highlight the pledges made at COP28, like phasing down coal power, tripling renewable energy capacity globally, doubling energy efficiency improvements, and transitioning away from fossil fuels in a fair way.
Right.
And they point out that the agreement on fossil fuels acknowledge that the transition needs to consider each country's situation. They also mention that the agreement on climate finance at COP29 wasn't as strong as some had hoped.
Got it.
And they connect this idea of a just, orderly, and equitable energy transition to access to affordable energy, referencing research by the McKinsey Global Institute on an empowerment threshold of energy consumption.
Okay, so making sure that access to energy is part of that transition conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Lastly, the report examines energy efficiency trends. How do those trends factor into the overall picture?
Well, energy efficiency varies from region to region. Europe's currently the most efficient, and they expect it to get even better.
Okay.
Asia Pacific is also expected to make big efficiency gains. But in lower income countries, they point out what's called the rebound effect.
Okay.
That's when improvements in efficiency actually lead to more energy consumption because the cost of using energy goes down. And interestingly, they talk about the growing demand from things like AI data centers and how natural gas plants can help meet that demand because they're so flexible.
Okay, so to sum up our deep dive into the global gas outlook 2050, it seems like natural gas is going to be a major player in the energy world all the way to 2050. It's not just about to disappear. Even with renewables growing so fast,
Right.
it's going to be this crucial bridge fuel, this important part of the energy mix, offering both energy and flexibility. It's a really complex picture shaped by all these different factors: regional demand, production, government policies, everything.
Absolutely. And going back to your point about being well informed, I think understanding these projections for natural gas and all the things influencing them, that's really key.
Yeah,
This
definitely.
report gives us a great starting point for that.
It does. Now, for a final thought, we've talked about economic shifts, population changes, tech advancements, climate goals, energy security, all this stuff. With all that in mind, what do you think will be the biggest unexpected factor that ends up shaping the energy mix in 2050?
That's a great question.
Right. It just goes to show how unpredictable the future of energy really is.
For sure. And it brings up so many more questions to think about, like what kind of tech breakthroughs besides the AI we talked about could shake things up? What are the geopolitical implications of all these shifting energy dynamics? And how can we, as individuals and businesses, get ready for these big energy transitions that are clearly on the horizon?
Those are all great questions to ponder. I hope this deep dive has given everyone some food for thought about this really important topic.
Me too.
We'll definitely keep an eye on how these trends develop and look forward to exploring more related areas in the future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
For more videos, don't forget to subscribe and like the videos.